Okay, welcome. This is a special edition here to help with some issues that seem to be a problem, and that is dealing with roots that have a Hamza in them, and specifically how to look them up in Hans Wehr, because he doesn't make it easy with the way he organizes his dictionary. So we're going to give you some help with that, and hopefully this will help you with the tests and any other assignments you have, and you can sleep as soundly as Gus and Scooter over here, who you can see are clearly not worried about Hamzas. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so in words like these, which have a Hamza in them somewhere, the question is, what's the root? Now, you know that's always the first question. We want to find out what the root is, and where do we look them up in Hans Wehr if we don't know what the meaning is? Well, Hans treats Hamza a little bit differently. If he treated it like any other letter, this would be easy. So we're going to talk about that. So the first thing to remember is that the letter Hamza usually sits on a seat. It sits on top of another letter. Can you believe that? What a terrible thing. Sitting on top of another letter. But it does. You can see it on any of these letters or sometimes by themselves. But remember, the seat is not important. It doesn't matter for this that this thing is on a wow here, that it's on a yeah here, that it's on an aleph. In all cases, what we are interested in is the Hamza. That's the letter that we're going to have to deal with. Okay? Great. Okay, so we come to something like this, and we want to say, what's the root? Now, the problem here is that not only do we need to identify the root, but we got to figure out where did old Hans Wehr put this root in his book. Now, for reasons we don't want to go into, Arabic does not consider Hamza to be a separate letter. So just deal with that. I mean, it works exactly like another letter, but the way that Hans is going to list it, and this is probably the most important thing to remember when looking up under Hans, right? Most important, remember, is that Hans is going to list Hamza as a root letter. He's going to list it under Aleph, simply because Aleph is one of the seats that it can sit on. So if you're looking alphabetically, and you know that Aleph is the first letter of the alphabet, and you know there's a Hamza, look under Aleph in the place of the Hamza, and we'll explain what that means. All right, so let's look at this word. This word is sa'ala. It means to ask a question. But if you didn't know that and you had to look it up, well, you know, the first thing we always want to do is find what are my three root letters. So I break this thing up into three. Great. I'm doing great so far. Now, the problem is this one. The scene, no problem. You know, we're going to go to the scene chapter of Hans Wehr. Now, what letter do we look next? Well, remember, the aleph is just a seat. The root here is Sin, Hamza, Lam. This is going to be important. Okay, so remember that. Don't get too obsessed with the seat. When you see it, you know that these are the root letters. Well, you say, that's great. I know the root. So now I just go look up under Hamza. Of course, Hans doesn't have a separate section for Hamza. So what does he do? Again, as I say, he's always going to list the Hamza under Aleph. So the first letter, Sin, then look under Aleph. Meaning, you go to Hans Wehr. All right, here's Sin. I mean, you can barely tell that that's a Sin because the printing is not great, but that was technology back then. All right, I have Sago, whatever the heck that is, Sako, whatever that is. But now, Sa'ela. And this is how he does it. So the root is Sin, Hamza, Lam. But you notice the way Hans lists it. He lists Hamza as if it were an aleph, okay, in terms of the alphabetical order. Because notice this is Sin, Aleph, Kaf, Sin, Aleph, Lam, and then the next one, Sin, Aleph, Mim. So that's what to look for, okay? So I'm going to look for something like this. You're going to say fabulous. There it is. And we know the first part is always the verbs. Well, to ask, to inquire, to request, to demand, to claim. All right, so we've got it. Well, what if it's not a verb? Okay, so let's look at this word, mas'ul. All right, you've all seen this word, mas'ul. Now, hopefully, you recognize that this is a passive participle, measure 1 of the pattern maf'ul. Well, remember, we got to just find our 3 root letters. Sin is the first one. Lam is obviously the last one. What's the middle one? Remember, don't worry about the seat. It's not wow. How do you know it's not wow? Because this Hamza is there. Okay, so the root is boom. Well, you say, wait a minute, that is the same root as the last word we just did. Yes, it is. So where are we going to look it up? Sin, Hamza, Lam. Okay, so you say that's great. Now here's the biggest thing. If you're just going to remember one thing here, right? You're just going to, one thing to drill into your memory. Remember again, where does Hans list this? He lists the Hamza where Aleph would be. So where are we going to look it up? Same exact place we looked it up last time. Sin, Hamza, but remember Hamza is listed alphabetically with Aleph and Lam. Okay, again, same root. Here are our verbs, but we know this is not a verb. Mas'ul is not a verb. Okay, so remember, only this big long paragraph at the beginning is only the verbs. Don't be looking up mas'ul here. It's not there. You got to go through the rest of the words and become, aha, mas'ul. Mas'ul, right here, and we find it means responsible, answerable, accountable. Right? It's the past participle of ask. So literally, it's someone who has been asked to do something. And you see all the other variations of it. Okay? So that's how you find a word that has the Hamza in the middle of it. First, recognize that the Hamza is part of the root, and then look it up under Hans, under Aleph. Okay? And notice he doesn't make a difference. Here's an Aleph with no Hamza. Here's an Aleph with a Hamza. There's an Aleph with no Hamza. Right? The word before it and the word after it. Okay? Well, you see, that's great. Can we do another example? Well, sure. Let's do it. We will go look at another example that will be helpful. Okay. So now we're going to look at this word, esesa, which you may know what it means, but we're going to look it up anyway. Now, before we do, I have to tell you something about Hans Ver, and since you're already probably loving Hans already and some of the curveballs he throws at you, this is only going to make you even more happy. But in some cases, and in fact there are quite a few of them, let's go back to our previous example here. Here you notice Hans has been nice and he has written the Hamza in. A lot of times, just the printing of this book, because, I mean, obviously this was not computer printed, a lot of times he'll leave off the Hamza. But you can tell where it is, and I'll show you on the next example. So a lot of times he would just write this as Sin, Aleph, Lam. Okay, so let's look at this one, and this is going to be the case in this case. So here we have the word esesa. Right? Now we want to look that up. How do we look that up? Well, let's go to Hans Ver. We are going to search. We're going to type in the letters that we want. Okay, I type in Aleph with a Hamza on it, and Sin, because you know this is two scenes. Boom. Here we go. We come to the right page. And here we find it. Now, if you look, there's 3 of them, but these are obviously just borrowed words, like, okay, the word for ace, and I'm not going to say it aloud, but you can see what it is. Interesting. Okay, and here we come to the root. This fits. Now, again, Hans did not write the Hamza up here. Now, I'm sure you're loving Hans at this point, but trust me, it's there. And you'll see as we go along, right? It starts to appear, in other words. This is just because of the printing and the way this thing is printed. You know that this is the Hamza. Right, again, so the root, we're going to break this up. Here's our root. We're going to look this up. Again, we know that's the root. And where does he list Hamza? Well, he lists it under Aleph, and we found it. Okay, now, one way you can do that is like I did by typing it in. You type in Aleph Hamza on the electronic version, and it will bring you to here. All right, and in this case, we find that the meaning of this word, here's the verbs, means to found, to establish, and so forth. Okay, great. So that's the meaning of that word. Let's look up another one, shall we? Okay. No, let's not. Let's not say we did. No. You're fucking crazy. Okay, at this point, you're probably feeling good. So let's try another one. And I'll throw another curveball at you. Now, unfortunately, Hans is a pretty useful guy, but when it came to Hamzas, I think he had some kind of issues, so he made them pretty difficult to look up. But we got to deal with it, because, you know, Hans is our dictionary person. All right, so I want to look up this word, asasa. Well, you can look and break it up into the 3 root letters, which of course is the first thing that you're always going to do. Okay, now, being smart that you are, you've already learned the lesson and you say, I know that that root letter there is a Hamza, and you would be quite correct. Okay, and if you go to Hans Ver and look this up, you're going to find it. Now, couple of things we have to mention about old Hans, just because he's a lot of fun. Okay, as I said, where does Hans list the Hamza? Right? Again, he lists it as if it's on an Aleph seat. In this case, it is the first letter of the root, so it's going to be in the first chapter of the book. It's going to be in the Aleph chapter of the book. And if you look it up under Aleph Seen, you're going to find it. Okay? Now, here's the thing. Hans apparently decided, since everybody knows that that's where the Hamza root goes, that sometimes, in a case like this, he actually writes the Hamza so you can see it. Well, that's nice of Hans that he does that. Other times he does not. Like, for example, if you look this word up, here's our Aleph, here's our Seen. All right, now we see a couple of words that are obviously borrowed words. Okay, this is the word for an ace, and I'm not going to pronounce that, and that's what you've been listening for. Okay, but here obviously is our word, because it's got a lot of things that come under it. Now, there is a Hamza on there. He didn't write it. Why? Because you know it would be there anyway. Right? Like, that's the place it would be, so in some cases he doesn't write it. That's what the root is. How can you tell? Well, scroll down here and you can see it starting to appear in some of these. Okay, it's just a case of the printing, the fact that they didn't print didn't have computer printing that in those days. Okay, so we look this up. We find that this word means to found, to establish, and so forth. Okay, that seems to fit. Let's drive on to another word. Okay. What if we wanted to look up this word, ta'sis? Okay, now you may already know and can do it without looking it up, but if not, what do we know about this word? Well, hopefully you recognize that this is a measure 2 masdar, which are very common, right? And the ta and the ya are added. So what is our root letters? Same ones we had before. Where is it going to be found? Same place we found it before. Now again, it's not a verb. In this case, the verb section is really short. So we're just going to have to scroll down here until we find ta'asis. Here it is. Founding, establishing, and so forth. Now, if you knew that the measure 2 was to found, obviously you wouldn't need to go all the way down there and look this up. But if you wanted to find the word mu'assis, okay, there it is under this same root, okay, because of the Hamza. So hopefully that is clear now. Now, if you were to ask me the question, well, how do I know that this here is an Aleph Hamza? Okay, now, if this is going to help you, listen to it. If this is going to confuse you, just close your ears and look at the nice doggy pictures which are coming up. The way we know is because of the order, right? Aleph, Hans puts Aleph always at the beginning. Now, a word that has a long vowel in the... Okay, that's too fucking confusing. Okay. All right, hold on. Okay, so now we found the word ta'sis and everybody is happy. All right, I'm going to show you one more trick here. Now, if this helps you, great. If this confuses you, then just pretend you never heard it and just look at the cute doggy pictures that come at the end of this video. But this will help you perhaps if you understand it. Now, realize, of course, before we go on, old Hans just had a real issue with long vowels. Why he didn't just list them in alphabetical order, it would have been so much easier. But there's real issues with this. So, particularly Aleph. So you see Aleph popping up in different places. This is where knowing the alphabetical order is very important. Now, of course, everybody knows Aleph is the first letter of the alphabet, and Waw and Ya are at the end. So, I mean, that's we're talking about the far ends of this. Notice when we're talking about an Aleph at the beginning, an Aleph Hamza, notice it comes at the beginning of the alphabet. Now, suppose I wanted to look up a word like, let's say, I'm going to look up this root. And I'm going to look it up in Arabic. Okay, so I got my Hamza sitting on Aleph. You probably can't even see that. It's so small. Jim Lam. I'm going to look that up. Okay? Boom. Takes me right to the right place. Now notice Hans hasn't put a Hamza on there, but when I typed it in, that's where it came up. And if you go down, right, you start seeing it appearing and everything's fine. Okay? You know what, let's skip that one. Okay. Okay, restart. Restart. Okay, restart. All right, I will show you this trick here. Now, let's say I want to look up a word in Hansver, so I type in my root. Let's type in, that one we just did earlier. Sin Hamza, and I realize you can barely see this, but I typed in a Hamza sitting on the Aleph seat. Lam. Okay, Lam. Sa'ala. Click OK, and where do I go? Right there. Sin, Aleph, Lam. Notice this is at the beginning of the alphabet. How do I know it's at the beginning of the alphabet? Because if I continue to scroll through, I next get to Sin, Ba, then Sin, Jim, and so forth. So it's that Aleph is at the beginning of the alphabet. That means it's an Aleph Hamza. Suppose I looked up another word, like one of your favorites, Nama, to sleep. Notice there is no Hamza on that letter. Okay. You know what? Skip this whole part. Skip this whole part. Okay. Skip that whole part. Skip that whole part. Skip that whole part. Okay, now you may be asking yourself, well, if Hans doesn't put the little Hamza up here, how can I tell that it actually is an Aleph Hamza that he's talking about? Well, without going into a lot of details, there are other ways you could know this, but it'd be more confusing. The easiest way to tell, okay, let's say we came to this word here, abara, right? Abara, okay, which is probably not a word you use a lot. Okay, it's Aleph, Ba, Ra. But as I said, that Aleph is a seat holding the Hamza. Well, how do you know that? The easiest way is just scroll down through Hans or scan down if you have your paper copy, and you'll begin to see a lot of Hamzas. Notice here, Mim, Hamza, Ba, Ra. Okay? And I can keep going on. Right? The same thing with any of these words that you look up. Right? Here's one. For example, abata. Well, how am I sure? Well, I start to scroll down and I don't see shit. Okay. Okay. And do that part again. And do that part again. Okay, ready? 3, 2, 1, go. Okay. Now, you may have one question is, well, if Hans doesn't put the little Hamza up here, because I guess it was too much work, how do we know that that is really an Aleph Hamza? Well, there are a couple of ways you could know this, right? And if you know about how the roots work, there are ways to find this out. But the easiest way is that once you find this root, even though he didn't write the Hamza here, scroll down and start to look at the other words underneath it. Or if you have your paper copy of Hans, just scan through it. So notice I start to see words that have the Hamza in them. Here's another one, abara, which is probably not a word you would use, right? But it's Aleph, Ba, Ra. Well, how do I know that's Aleph Hamza? The easiest way, I start to scan down here, and I see very clearly a word that is Mim, Hamza. This time it's on a Ya seat, Ba, Ra. Okay, and so that's the easiest way to know. That when you start seeing those words under there that have the Hamza in them, then you found the right one. Okay, so at this point, you're probably feeling really great. You're as happy as Bella here about these words with the Hamza root on them. Okay, so if that's the case, please make sure you feel good. Pause this, go back, re-listen, try some practice. Do it again until you're absolutely sure you understand it so that the next slide that comes up does not confuse you, because it might. Okay, you're still with us. Okay, so unfortunately, of course, they couldn't leave something that simple. So what you have to be careful with is do not confuse all these words that we have seen, all right, that have all these Hamzas in various places with this very definite pattern here that we've seen many of. Notice consonant, Aleph, Hamza on the Ya seat, and then Ra. Okay? That, as you hopefully know, this is an active participle of a word that has a long vowel in the middle of it. But notice it's a very distinct pattern. Right? So this is another one to recognize. If you see this word, sa'ek, then this is the root. Za'er, this is the root. Okay, now that was in the active participle lesson. If you need to, go back and review it. So don't confuse this pattern, which is about the only pattern you're going to see a Hamza mysteriously appear in the middle of a word that is not part of the root. That's about the only time. With these other words that very clearly have Hamzas as part of their root. I know it looks a little bit confusing, but I guess it was just too hard to resist making words like this. Okay, so again, go back and review the key points. Recognize when there is a Hamza in the root. Know where to look for it. Again, it's going to be under A. Where the Hamza is going to be where the Aleph would be. And that's a key thing you need to know, and scan until you find the words you need, and then you will be as happy as Rusty here, and you'll be sticking your tongue out all over the place too. So thank you very much. Hopefully this will help you on your test and so forth. Shukran jazilan.